Scott, many things have happened with respect to the war in Ukraine. Decisions in Moscow, events on the battlefield, decisions in Washington, decisions in Berlin. But I want to start with something you've written about extensively lately. In fact, your piece on it was the best I have seen on this event. And of course, as you know, thanks to you and Colonel McGregor, I've begun to devour everything I can get my hands on. And that is Ramstein. What happened in Ramstein, Germany, involving the Secretary of Defense of the United States and many others in the past week?
Well, on January 20th, they convened, I believe, the eighth session of what they call the Ramstein Contact Group. That's basically a forum where the defense ministers of NATO and allied states like Sweden, Finland, gather and coordinate with their Ukrainian counterparts on the material support that Ukraine says it needs to continue this conflict with Russia. This current iteration of the Ramstein Contact Group was notable because it came in the aftermath of a declaration made by General Zaluzhny, who is the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, where he said straight up, unless you provide me with 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, and 500 artillery pieces.
In other words, a new army.
A new army. I'm going to lose the war with Russia. We can't win. Straight up said it to The Economist magazine. And so the Ramstein Group met to meet this requirement. And what they emerged with was less than 50% of the infantry fighting vehicles that General Zaluzhny requested. And even these, the majority of them, 90 Stryker vehicles, aren't infantry fighting vehicles. They're infantry carrying vehicles. If you actually took them into the forward edge of the battle area in a modern war, they'd all be destroyed. Less than 20% of the artillery that was requested. And at the time of the Ramstein Group, barely 10% of the tanks that were requested. Now, since then, there's been pressure placed on Europe to increase the number of tanks. And right now, the number of armor vehicle or tanks that have been promised is less than 50% of that which was requested. But what complicates this, go ahead.
Before we get into tanks and Bradleys versus Leopards and the American tanks versus the German tanks, you have your finger on the pulse of NATO. Is there a fissure down the middle of NATO between hawks, like the United States, and doves? I'm just going to throw out a country, Finland, France. In other words, are there countries in NATO that see this for what it is, an inevitable Russian victory and the futility of the West getting involved? And are those countries at odds with other Western NATO countries like the United States and perhaps Germany after Joe Biden twisted their arms? You follow my question?
No, I follow your question. I mean, I'll start off by saying there are definitely doves and hawks in NATO. That I mean, it was interesting to hear Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, and General Miley, Mark Miley, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, come out of the Ramstein Group saying NATO's never been more unified in its entire history. What a load of farce! Yeah, it's basically horse dung. The NATO is extraordinarily divided. And, there are nations that are just saying straight up, we're not participating in this. There's other nations that participate in a farcical level, meaning providing equipment that doesn't work, can't work, won't work. But the most important thing is, coming out of the Ramstein Group, is that none of them believe Ukraine can win the war. None of them. And the reason why I say that is, if you thought Ukraine could win the war, then you'd give Ukraine that which it claims it needs to win the war. Instead, you give them less than 50%, and it's staggered on a timetable, which means it'll never get there. You won't be properly trained on it. It won't be logistically sustainable. So you're guaranteeing that Ukraine will lose the war, but you're creating the political image that we're doing everything in our power to help Ukraine win. If they fail to win, that's on Ukraine.
Why did President Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, Secretary of Defense Austin twist the arms of their opposite numbers in Germany to get Germany to spring loose with these Leopard tanks. What is the significance, Scott, of German tanks, if anything?
Okay, let me try and answer the question. The arm twisting that took place is purely political. The fact of the matter is, Germany is constrained by law to provide military equipment of this nature. I mean, there's in the aftermath of the Second World War, there's this, and today is Holocaust Remembrance Day. People should recall that. There's this thing, never again. And that was about never again will we allow the Holocaust to take place. But Germany took that to heart. Never again meant never again will they allow Germany, and especially German industry, to be militarized in a manner which has German tanks going on Ukrainian soil to kill Russians, which is what people have been asking to do. Germany was the key here. The Leopard 2 tank is the most modern tank that's available in numbers sufficient enough to actually have a meaningful impact on the battle, but they can't be provided unless Germany agrees to the exportation. Germany said, we're not going to do it unless somebody else steps up to the plate. The British said 14 Challenger tanks. That's nothing. The Germans wanted Americans. So the Americans said that they would, I apologize for this. The Americans said that they would provide the M1 tank, but they're not. It's a lie. First of all, we're not giving the Ukrainians the real tank. The real tank has depleted uranium armor and can actually survive in a modern battlefield. We're not giving them that. We're giving them the old tank with steel armor, and we don't even have those. So it's going to take months to prepare these things, to produce them. Some people say they won't be available until the summer, the fall, maybe even next year, which means the M1 Abrams tank isn't part of this. It's all about Germany getting the German tanks freed up. And that's what the United States did. We misled the Germans. We lied to the Germans. We lied to the Ukrainians in order to get them to release these Leopard 2 tanks.